This is the London FinTech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is the third in a micro-series of 4 episodes to celebrate 10 years of the London FinTech Podcast, brought to you in association with Smart and the enlistedboard.com. And we're going to discuss the super hot and super important topic of what risks AI poses to humanity and society. In the next and final episode in the mini-series, we will look at the future of FS, FinTech and the podcast. Some exciting levelling up plans are afoot. And, talking about exciting plans, listen up to the end of the show to hear our personal plans for escape ourselves. But for now, there is perhaps not a hotter and more misunderstood topic than that of AI and the risks it poses to society. Many indeed fear that it will eliminate human beings. The influential Geoffrey Hinton, co-creator of the seminal backpropagation algorithm way back in the day, has been all over the media saying that we need to worry and that there is a 50% chance that AI outsmarts humanity and poses an existential risk. Other insiders put that probability at 100%. Should we too worry if the real insiders are sounding the alarm? I think not. But if not, are not the insiders the people to turn to? Well, if the insiders were, say, insiders at Boeing, who were, for example, blowing the whistle about dangerous aircraft manufacturing processes, then yes, we absolutely should be concerned. Mind you, we might also be concerned about the fact that 3 former employees in a row who found their whistles to blow suddenly died in mysterious circumstances as well. However, if in simple terms, airplane manufacturing risks are very much in the box, the risks that AI poses are very much out of the AI box that the experts are experts in. Whilst one must listen to their technological concerns, neural net experts are not experts out of the box, and it requires an assessment from outside the box to consider the risks to society as a whole. So let's dive into whether AI is about to decide that their users are useless eaters, or will AI be more benign than WEF luminaries and turn us not into slaves but serve us? Or is AI merely the latest in many tools, many changes of technology which fit into a long-established pattern of such over the millennia? Each new technology by definition affecting the world in unique, new ways as well as the same old patterns. This episode will have 5 sections. Firstly, we will briefly summarise the prior episode on what an LLM is and contextualise those in the wider field of AI and touch on why LLMs in particular pose greater concerns than other types of AI technologies which have been in use for a long time. In the second section, I'll briefly summarise LFP10th on the impact of technology on society historically. This new tech isn't humanity's first rodeo. In the third section, before we assess risk in any domain, we need to address biases that people have. Linguistic, conceptual, philosophical, metaphysical, sociological and psychological. Fourth, we will look at 4 domains that AI will impact and affect society. The crazy sci-fi that the robots are taking over, the economic impact, the informational impacts and technological developments. Fifth, we will address the key point of who controls the technology. This who controls is for me the real crux of the matter, and right now much of what one hears from experts is propaganda designed to influence that outcome. To simplify things, will you end up owning your own super smart chatbot, or will it be centrally controlled by Big Brother, the corporate state, who will keep you safe and feed you its propaganda? And finally we summarise, and in the outro I share our personal plans. Section 1. A quick recap of the LLMs Demystified episode. LLMs, large language models, are in essence 2 programs whose purpose is being accurate at next word prediction, or more technically next fraction of a word prediction, in internet, text and human interactions. Next word prediction per se isn't that important. However, it has proved to be an amazingly powerful mechanism, as to be able to do that well means creating a deep encoding of human language. The first program, the training program, processes a huge chunk of the internet and outputs a huge file of numbers which in essence encode all of human language as it is used. I sketched out how one could schematically implement this training program in 2 pages of a spreadsheet. Let's call them calculate and correct, followed by a whole bunch of pages to store the numerical weights. The second program of an LLM is, roughly speaking, a chatbot. That is schematically page 1 of the training program in all the weights pages. It takes your query and outputs a textual reply word by word. To give an example of the scale, I used Meta's Llama 2, which is open source, and so we have the numbers. Current leading edge LLMs are way larger. Llama 2 version 70B training program input 10,000 gigabytes of textual training data, that is a large chunk of the internet. It ran for 12 days on 6,000 GPUs, GPUs being graphics processing units, which are faster as they are more parallelized than CPUs, centralized processing units. And the program output 140 gigabytes of numerical weights, which represents a roughly 100-fold smaller output file than input file. Llama 2's chatbot program is a small program, in this case 500 lines of C code. It takes in the 140 gigabyte file of numbers and your query, and if you had enough memory to download 140 gigabytes of numbers and a lot of patience, you could then, without any internet whatsoever, chat away to this chatbot forevermore. Although in practice you might want to download the 1/10 the size model, Llama 2's 7B, which runs in real time on a MacBook. So we can clearly see that LLMs are simply an enormous data processing exercise for the training program and a pretty simple calculating program for the chatbot, albeit one that still takes a lot of compute and data resources to run. Interestingly, I found out, since the last episode, the training program need not be amazingly complex. Quite the opposite. Andrej Karpathy, former LLM big cheese at OpenAI and at Tesla, tweeted, quotes, "These 94 lines of code are everything that is needed to train a neural network. Everything else is just efficiency." Wow. Finally, I described the 81-year long history that led up to ChatGPT and LLMs in general. And that insanely over-the-top AI hype dates back as far as 1958, when Rosenblatt, talking about a physical machine, said that, quotes, "The Navy expects it'll be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself and be conscious of its existence. Plus ça change." In the last episode, I focused on LLMs alone, but notably for this podcast, they are only one field of AI. They are, however, at the core of most risk concerns. As being linguistic, they are capable of developing, to a certain extent, plans, and are also pretty good at writing code. As such, they lead to much more complex consequences than, say, visual recognition AI, which has been around for some time and is used in speed cameras or to tag you in photos on Facebook. One example of planning I saw was that someone managed to jailbreak an LLM, i.e. get inside the so-called safety guardrails, and get the LLM to come up with a plan to eliminate or reduce the numbers of humans on the planet. It came up with a plan to create a novel virus, which is highly dangerous to humans, and then release it. Hardly an original plan, one might note. Section 2. Recapping the social impact of new technologies per se. This isn't man's first technological levelling up rodeo. Although LLMs are new and unique, they are still just a new technology, and we've had many versions of that since we crawled out of the sea. In LFP10th, the philosophy of technology and technique and their existential impact on people, society and civilization with Oswald Spengler and Jacques Ellul, I highlighted 3 main categories of negative societal impacts of new technologies. Firstly, new technology moves power geographically further away from the people. In the LLM space, witness the recent OpenAI board appointment of an NSA director. The US deep state in the tech age is perhaps the ne plus ultra of information and power concentration, as Snowden warned us to his cost. Secondly, new technology, be it farming or cotton mills or LLMs, leads to great wealth concentration in the hands of a few. How much would you trust Sam Altman to do what is right for you rather than for himself? Thirdly, and more subtly, technology conditions man to being ever more procedural, ever more robotic. Look at those folks around you glued to their phones and hypnotized, or those awful screechy clickbaity YouTube titles with seemingly randomly capitalized words. You can call that AI if you want, but to me it seems more like artificial stupidity. In the same way, even algorithms enslave man. You have to in effect worship and obey the YouTube algorithm if you want it to reward you with views and hence money. Interestingly, I think this third category of conditioning man to be ever more robotic might perhaps be less applicable to LLMs, as their chatbots have been fine-trained to be so human-like. Mind you, we can witness insanities such as the prediction of a billion-dollar market in so-called AI girlfriends. In summary, at a simple level, all technological change at first generally causes more problems than it solves, and the problematic impacts take time to iron out. You can think of sending children up chimneys to clean them post-industrial revolution. Pollution issues in some cities are still a, quote, bug of the industrial revolution, and so forth. So to put it mildly, it can take a long time to sort out the downsides of new and otherwise desirable technologies. Historically, governments controlled the risks by creating laws, for example, against sending children up chimneys into factories, and firms created technological developments, in this case the chimney sweep's long brushes, which also helped the situation. However, it is important to focus on the fact that there are major upsides as well as downsides. And I think with this current AI, there are some amazing and exciting possibilities, as well as, like all new technology, it posing new risks and challenges. Section 3. Biases in the assessment of risk in AI. None of us perceive the world the way it is, but we perceive it the way we perceive it to be, and our filters are massive. So let's first hone and sharpen our Occam's razors, or maybe in this case, Occam's machetes, before we walk into the thicket of views and opinions about AI's impact and risks therein to society. My aim is not to be comprehensive, but just to give a feel. Let's pick 6 areas of bias to focus on. Risk perception biases, linguistic biases, metaphysical/philosophical errors, what is intelligence, the sociology of the tech scene, and some key psychological biases. 3.1. Risk perception biases. Within this, let's touch on 5 sub-challenges to give you a flavour of the difficulty of making a more neutral assessment of the risk of AI. Professional risk assessment experience is rare in society, and even rarer is coming at it from a blank sheet of paper. Much FS risk these days is regulatory, not ticking the right boxes for the unelected officials who have total power over the sector. Conversely, back in the commercial world, Lloyd's of London, roughly speaking, managed to price risks from a de facto holistic perspective roughly right for 3 centuries. They had no off-balance sheet civil servants autocratically demanding ever more bureaucracy, simply the desire not to lose all their money and to make a few quid. The fact that 3 centuries in they had huge problems shows the challenge of risk management per se. So, in terms of these 5 aspects, the first is newness. LLMs are of course super new, which means that we have very little empirical data, and that which we do have shows next to no actual risk. However, in a rapidly evolving scene, the past is not always a great guide to the future. Secondly, in all walks of life, humans overweight the probability of unlikely events and underweight the probability of more likely events. To take a grim example, people overrate the probability of being murdered by a stranger, but underweight the chance of being murdered by someone they know. Third, fear and shock sells. Media and social media algorithms amplify the wild and wacky and diminish the spread of the sane and grounded. Robots will conquer the earth pronouncements get way more clicks than balanced concerns over AI's impact. Fourthly, with smartphones, we all live in a world of constantly on information, as a result of which we're surrounded by the most catastrophic set of shock horror worries than any of our ancestors ever, who received little news in general and next to none about faraway shock horrors. This swimming in a sea of fear and the Facebookization of others presenting their lives way above what they actually are has been catastrophic for mental health. This always-on perma-fear is the as yet huge unsolved bug of the information age, which is with us way before LLMs and AI. Fifthly, people generally overlook important scenarios completely. I have seen this many times in FS, with structured products which blew up as a result of the unimagined happening. A notorious example of this was the 1999 Tokaimura nuclear accident. Risk assessments of nuclear power are comprehensive, but not comprehensive enough. No one had considered that a couple of guys trying to get off home on a Friday decided to save time by stirring uranium in a bucket. Now, this might sound like an obscure risk, and it is. However, what is not obscure is that human beings don't always follow procedures manuals, even in a mythical world where procedures manuals are 100% accurate and comprehensive. Notable examples being many plane crashes. Equally to procedures in complex environments never being 100% bug-free, sometimes lives have been saved by throwing the manual out of the window. In conclusion, top-down, i.e. big picture risk management, is as much an art as a science, and I personally would not overly weight anyone's perception of the probability of risk who hasn't worked professionally in risk management or risk assessment. Section 3.2, Linguistic. We are very much coloured in our perceptions of reality by words. That's the art of rhetoric, of prose, of poetry, and of propaganda. Terminology matters, and indeed, perhaps most off-beam answers to the risk question are due to inappropriate terminology having sent people's minds down one route. The majority of current presentations and explanations of this technology fall for anthropomorphization, the whole "it thinks this" and "it is learning that" and "it's like your brain," "it's a neural network," "it hallucinates," and so forth, starts all non-AI folk off on the wrong track and subconsciously conditions way too many AI folk to being predisposed to feel about it in a certain way. And to risk assessment, it is feelings, it is intuition, it is hunches that lead us to certain conclusions that we only subsequently rationalise. As I said in the prior episode about so-called neural networks, I'm reminded of that awful idea of so-called modern portfolio theory, the bane of corporate finance and investment to this day. If anyone read it, they'd find that A, far from being modern, it was written in 1952, and B, Markowitz said, look, this mean variance is absolutely not how the world works, but let's see what we get from it. Somewhere along the line, this has been forgotten, and it's been turned into something more akin to the Bible as seen by religious fundamentalists. We might also say the same about Cadbury's 1992 paper on corporate governance, in which he emphasises that control is only one of many roles a board plays. Fast forward, and corporate governance is seen to be virtually entirely about corporate control. Ray's so-called neural networks, McCulloch and Pitt's seminal 1943 paper, basically said, look, this isn't anything like a neuron, but, and fast forward, and everyone, Hinton included, neglect the, look, this isn't anything like bit and focus on the neuron word. In the parallel universe where no one had used the neural word, or the intelligent word, more on that anon, this data processing approach, which is what it is, might be more accurately entitled numerical models of language where the training data is encoded into a set of weights for matrices of functions that lead to a model which will extrapolate well to out-of-sample data. Neat, eh? Kind of snappy. On the other hand, in that parallel universe, VCs may well have piled billions of less dollars into the sector. That in this universe, the two letters AI alone must have led to billions of dollars flowing in. On the other hand, I doubt in that universe they had to concern themselves with most crazy predictions of consciousness and sci-fi visions of it, quotes, deciding, unquotes, to eliminate human beings, and so forth. Section 3.3, Metaphysical and Philosophical Errors. This is a vast territory. I will, however, highlight two angles only, metaphysical beliefs/premises and reification. First, metaphysical beliefs/premises. Leading on from human-centered descriptions of data processing techniques is the idea that, quotes, if you have enough of them, it will become conscious. If you believe that the human being is just a machine and the brain is just like your LLM, then you might be disposed to believe that ChatGPT 4.0, with its trillion or so connections, is, quotes, only 100 to 1,000 times smaller than the brain. It would then follow that, quotes, all one has to do is make it 100 to 1,000 times larger, and it will be a human brain, and conscious, and then make it bigger still, and it will be superior to us. There is so much wrong with that view that one could spend a whole episode on it, but let's, for the sake of brevity, just run it through with two swords. The first, as above, is that McCulloch's original 1943 paper said, this is nothing like how neurons operate. The second is that the core bias here is a de facto metaphysical belief in philosophical materialism. Or more precisely, it is not the fact that some folks have a certain metaphysical belief. We all explicitly or implicitly have them, but being unable to appreciate that one's belief is just that, a belief, not a fact. Even were philosophical materialism correct, these folks are still putting to one side matters of emotion, much of whose impact is molecular, hence the deleterious impact of stress, hopes, dreams, fears, willpower, persistence, and a zillion other attributes that comprise a conscious human being rather than an advanced calculator. Philosophical materialism is, in my direct experience, incorrect. Furthermore, we have the example of many centuries of yogis and their achievement of siddhis, abilities well beyond the common all-garden senses. Alan Turing himself, in his seminal 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, referring to extrasensory perception, wrote, "These disturbing phenomena seem to deny all our usual scientific ideas. How we should like to discredit them. Unfortunately, the statistical evidence, at least for telepathy, is overwhelming." And since his time, Sheldrake, for one, has performed countless experiments on telephone telepathy, dogs who know their owners are coming home, and so forth. And Dean Radin has written books and books about statistics and meta-analyses of scientific experiments which lead no evidential doubt. However, some of these self-styled rational folk who sound the alarm are not, after all, swayed solely by rational evidence, or even reason. Hinton, in an interview I saw a while back, said, "Religion is obviously rubbish." Ah, well, there you go then. That's sorted. Obvious, really. No evidence was presented for this position other than taking one's personal beliefs to be a fact. Religion in practice is such a multifaceted and highly complex social system that it can neither be simply right or simply wrong, even if we boil it down to its Western essence of a God, capital A, capital G, or the God, capital T. To argue for the non-existence of something you've never experienced, or consciously experienced perhaps, is not, well, intelligent, is it? I personally have not experienced any phenomena that I would interpret as the Western God, but I do not take that as proof that there is no such thing as the Western God, in the same way that if I haven't seen a white elephant, it isn't proof that they don't exist. Or, to put it a different way, I wouldn't ask a computer science about matters of metaphysics any more than I would ask a Buddhist monk about issues of training neural networks. Back to the infinitely more complex than a calculating machine nature of a human being, we all have a conceit that we are way more rational than we actually are. If you don't believe me, ask your partner whether you have ever been irrational. Long but important story short, matrices of functions and a static set of weights have nothing to do with existence, being human, willpower, desire to command and control, etc., etc. Which in passing doesn't mean that AI is not risky. Cars are risky, but no one mistakes them for being human-like or conscious. Second point within 3.3, reification. Reification, conceiving of non-things as things, is a core perceptual mode of frontal cortex human beings, especially for those who use noun-based languages, which are centered on things rather than verb-based languages, which are centered on activities or processes. Reification has enabled all sorts of intellectual progress, as it means we have a shorthand for a highly complex set of parts and phenomena, let's say your car, for example. Truncating excess philosophical digression, there are no things as such. Ask Heraclitus or the Buddha. Or just consider your car. Is there a car, a thing in and of itself, which has wheels, has an engine, etc.? Or is the term car nothing other than a simple reference to a collection of parts? Clearly the latter. The relevance of which is that most scary predictions involve the word it taking over. But there is no it. What actually is, say, Excel on your computer? Well, some kind of inconceivable pattern of magnetic charge on my hard drive right now. Again, like the car, there is no it. Reification naturally leads us down the direction of attributing agency and human-like characteristics. You might say, for example, my darn car is playing up again. And this is pretty much identical in feeling to my darn teenager is playing up again. Using it inevitably brings us to language like it thinks, it learns, it's going to do this. Mind you, once we embody, literally, programs in machines, let's say walking robots, and give them a gun, I might overcome this philosophical objection and run away. But I would run away for the same reason that I'd run away from your car if it was coming straight at me. But more on AI controlling machinery, as it already does, later. In the meantime, we all need reminding that when we use ChatGPT and say it said, that's just a shorthand with no implications philosophically. There is no more an it than there is a car separate from its parts. In fact, even less. At least the car's parts are real physical things. ChatGPT is literally a computation. Section 3.4. What is intelligence anyway? The lack of any definition of intelligence is a huge stumbling block, as the scariest forecasts are based on the idea that the more of this undefined thing that one has, the more dangerous the technology becomes. But this is crazy. Let's say we make ChatGPT 100 times larger. It still just inputs your query and outputs its answer. And highly pertinently, there's very little data remaining to be eaten up to train the systems 100 times better. Ideas of AI creating its own data is clearly circular. I would also recall that in the 1960s, AI was aimed at doing intelligent things. And intelligent things were obviously the kind of things at that time that computer scientists did, as they are obviously intelligent, but perhaps within the box. So things like mathematical proofs and playing chess were their focus, as they were the pastimes of computer professors. However, it turned out that you could beat a world champion at chess with zero intelligence, but just massive brute force. And in terms of the really hard challenges, walking and talking proved way harder. In terms of this absence of definition, leading to never-ending conversations, and it's not just AI now, we have AGI and ASI and the latest kid on the block, SSI, none of them defined. I'm reminded of Feynman when he spent time at a philosophy seminar observing the philosophers debating and discussing concepts without ever having defined what each of them meant by any of them. And let's just take some practical examples. Is the YouTube recommendation algorithm intelligent? The computer processing of images has been well ahead of text processing. Just look at all those speed cameras out there which spot the speeding cameras, find them and send out the fine. Is that intelligent? Bloody annoying for sure, but intelligent? Airplane autopilot systems have been around for a long time, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone call them intelligent. Going back to seminal influences, Turing, in his paper I mentioned earlier, started with, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? Curiously, he would have felt at home with clickbait, as you only have to get to page 8 to see him write, the original question, can machines think, I believe to be too meaningless to deserve discussion. Oh well, there you go. Something lost on current discourse, although the practice has continued. Turing himself might have better labelled his paper the Turing test, a way of sidestepping the fact that no one knows what thinking actually is. As Turing wrote, the new form of the problem can be described in terms of a game which we shall call the imitation game, the essence of which is that once one cannot tell whether it's a computer or a person replying to you, we might as well call it intelligent. However, the artifice operates by artifice, hence the use of the imitation game. In an equally anthropomorphic fashion, one would have to say that a motorbike or car runs faster than me. Now, running is easy to define as it's a visible process, but wave that to one side and we can see the motor vehicle as an artificial runner, and one that is way better runner than I, and this turns out to have infinite uses which the whole world relies on. So it's definitely not an objection about AI to say that it does not think as a man does. It most certainly does not think at all. But just as a car is useful, as it goes faster than I even if it doesn't run, then ChatGPT knows more than I do. But it's not intelligent in the slightest. As per Turing, its output simulates intelligence, and it occasionally talks complete bollocks. Mind you, come to think of it, so do many intelligent people, so perhaps ChatGPT is a better mimic than we give it credit for, after all. Talking of human intelligence, or lack thereof, much of the leading-edge AI crowd are based in California. OpenAI, for example, is in San Francisco. How, pray tell, is it intelligent to vote time and time again for utterly ruinous policies that are destroying your state, which a few decades back was the nearest thing to heaven on earth, but is now a social catastrophe for way too many people? It's a serious question, which also shows that humans, even ones that generally self-regard as compassionate and morally superior to their fellow citizens, can wreak massive damage on society without needing any computers. In a recent interview, Hinton's main argument about why we should worry was that he doesn't know of anything more intelligent not controlling the less intelligent. Furthermore, he revealingly mumbled after this, saying, well, ever since Biden took office. I don't know what his definition of intelligence is, but regardless of who one prefers politically, I find it hard to take seriously anyone who thinks that Biden is more intelligent than Trump, when Biden is clearly quite senile and his administration has been perhaps the most devastating to the US and the rest of the world ever. Is that intelligent? But back to Hinton's main comment rather than his revealing aside. And to be clear, I'm not picking on Hinton. Rather, he has had a long time to consider this topic and allegedly left Google to be able to go public with his concerns, which is spread everywhere. So you might think that his arguments aren't so weak. By definition, his example about control are all drawn from human beings. In principle, it might be true of human societies, but quite how one defines whether, say, the Athenians were more or less intelligent than the Spartans, I do not know. Also, I don't exactly think that the Mongols conquered such a vast territory by superior intelligence, but rather by superior, mindless violence. And it's not just me. Jan LeCun, who is Meta's head of AI and responsible for the Llama series of LLMs, whilst agreeing with Hinton in his assessment of Biden's intelligence versus Trump's, dismisses Hinton's argument about the more intelligent dominating the less, saying simply that it is patently untrue, that if anything, the desire to dominate is not correlated with intelligence. If anything, it's the inverse, witnessed both Einstein and Feynman both being relatively poor and modest and desiring to control no one. As to how well LLMs mimic intelligence, as LeCun says in a tweet, the issue is that LLMs have no common sense, no understanding of the world, and no ability to plan and reason. And so in passing, it has a slightly higher hurdle than I for the meaning of the word plan, which is fine. Ilya Sutskever, recently former CTO at OpenAI, says, so far these models aren't actually very competent. In conclusion, if no one can define intelligence, we're better off sticking with ideas of data processing programs that are useful in certain cases and whose applications are expected to mushroom in all sorts of ways, perhaps mostly unenvisaged. Section 3.5. The sociology of tech firms. Or in other words, games people play. Humans, founders and definitely firms act in ways to maximize their influence, wealth and power. So if people who understand what a computer is proceed to emphasize it as being human-like, there must be something in it for them. Cui bono? VCs clearly salivate more at anthropomorphic marketing spin and concepts of a technology so powerful that it could wipe out humanity. Wow, if only we could tame that awesome power. Imagine how much money we could make. As we all know, over-the-top marketing and hypery absolutely saturates the US tech scene. The term AI is now a marketing term and hugely overused. One notable example I saw recently being an AI toothbrush that learns your pattern of brushing your teeth. Yeah, right. The technology is also over-applied, given the perceived marketing advantages. My Bavarian Motorworks automobile has a so-called adaptive throttle, which, quotes, adapts to my driving style. I wish it bloody wouldn't. I wish it would just do what I ask rather than triple guessing me. Having raised the point, I'm going to take this hypery as read, as we're all exposed to it. Importantly, it's a massive distortion, which means that we cannot literally take anything key players say as what they believe, but rather what they say to help further themselves and their goals in the tech firm games that they are all playing. An example of this was a recent Bloomberg interview with such luminaries as Mira Murati, CTO of OpenAI, and Reid Hoffman. Murati was asked about one of the anthropomorphic terms which most grinds my gears, namely hallucinate. The question being, why call it hallucinate when it's just a model prediction error? She floundered around and was most unconvincing. A very well-liked comment below the YouTube said, apropos the interviews, there is deception on many levels. No one is telling the truth but trying to remember PR lines. Sam Altman has always been at the front of saying that AI might be really dangerous to the world, which is very curious. After all, I can't really believe that the first caveman dude who mastered fire went around shouting about how fire could be a complete disaster, thereby getting his buddies to kill his invention at birth. However, Altman, it seems, has method behind his apparent madness. Whatever his core belief, his actions have clear game theoretical advantages. If Washington does nothing and this technology blows up, he can say, well, look, no one has spoken more on this topic than me, but you chose to do nothing to regulate this technology. Vice versa, his desire is apparent for regulation, which would allow big AI to join big pharma, big banking, big food, big agriculture, big war and such, and buy off regulators and politicians while keeping new players at bay by creating a huge regulatory moat around the scene. So, in conclusion, for simpler, former American terms, tech bro speaks with forked tongue. Section 3.6. Psychology. Sociology naturally leads into psychology, the former being the summation of countless of the latter. We all have cognitive biases, we're all products of our experience. In the interest of time, let's just go with the oxymoronic yet helpful American saying, where you stand depends on where you sit. The interaction of beliefs and assumptions / personal disposition is massive in this enumeration and evaluation of risks. I watched one TED talk by a professional AI researcher in which they said that the risk of LLMs is that they will cause climate change and increase disinformation. Oh, good. She also gave the ridiculously hyped example of the once prestigious, now the opposite, New York Times and its hysterical article about ChatGPT, quotes, advising, unquotes, some guy to leave his wife. Shock drama. Well, I guess if someone pays you to focus on these kind of things, well, good luck to you. Ideological possession is a huge distortion, whether it is wokeism in this case or Trump derangement syndrome in Hinton and LeCun. Ideological possession is the equivalent of becoming a religious fundamentalist. You see the world through filters which are very strong and very rigid. More generally, and perhaps underlying some of these insane sci-fi paranoia scenarios about robots taking over, is a huge amount of apocalypticism in the world. Right now, plenty of people feel that something approaching the end of the world is nigh. This is unsurprising, as those in the West, at least, have had their taxes used against them in recent years by governments, psychologists programming folks to be fearful, locked them up in their house, economically ruined them unless they were part of the tiny elite whose wealth increased by trillions over the scamdemic, watch their civilizations collapse, other countries destroyed, and talk of nuking Russia as Russia's only bluffing about retaliating, and so forth. If it is indeed technologically the best of times, then in the empire of lies it is the worst of times too. In such circumstances, it's impossible for folks to assess technological risks neutrally. At the psychological level, we're all conditioned by our experiences in life. Let's say you spend your life reading books about alien invasions. You're likely to rate the chance way higher than someone who doesn't believe that aliens exist. Equally, if you watch films about machines taking over the world, then this scenario will feel more likely to you than if you've never seen or read about such. Another prior for over-predicting catastrophes is to have had a life with too much trauma, which creates a kind of PTSD, whether formally with capital letters or less so with small letters. Either way, trauma cannot but colour one's outlook on life, and in passing, poor Geoffrey Hinton has had 2 wives die on him, which must be appalling, and cannot not colour his view. Equally, one needs to make the point that while psychological biases will amplify or reduce one's risk assessment, I'm not saying that Hinton or Altman are wrong in saying that these systems pose unique and novel risks. The systems do. I would just say that if God assessed forecasters as coming out as over or under predictors, Altman and Hinton are highly likely to come out as over predictors. Section 4 of 5, AI, Risk Impact Domains. So, having spent some time explaining why experts within the box are likely to misestimate and misrepresent risk of out-of-the-box risks, let us look at 4 domains of risks to society. Crazy risks, sci-fi and metaphysically maladjusted risks, economic risks, informational risk, and technological risks. Section 1. Sci-fi and metaphysically maladjusted risks. Many commentators treat AI and LLMs as if they're on the way to becoming people, and some that they are about to be even better than people. Loud voices have seen way too much sci-fi and worry about them taking over the earth and replacing us, etc. The future is yet to be seen, but right now ChatGPT isn't about to electrocute all its operators, build a robot, and install itself in it and go around shooting everyone. Too many video games, guys. I recall that chap who temporarily replaced Altman as CEO at OpenAI banging on about P-Doom in a manic fashion. A lot of these West Coasters are just plain weird. Nothing new there then. And as to psychological distortions and self-regarding intelligence, the so-called effective altruism movement looms large. According to Wiki, this is about, quotes, using evidence and reason to figure out how to benefit others as much as possible and taking action on that basis. That sounds nice, doesn't it? By 2019, it had raised nearly $500 million, although today, even amongst relatively dry AI YouTube channels, one hears the angle that effective altruism is best known for the behaviours of key players being neither effective nor altruistic. Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX and prison fame is a prime example, along with former OpenAI board member Helen Toner, who took the bizarre position that destroying the world's most innovative company would be consistent with its mission. And that's before we get to the real wacky people who feel that fairly soon you'll be able to upload your consciousness onto the email it to yourself somewhere else and download it into a 3D printed body. Nuts. Grounded, a lot of these people are not. An OpenAI chap was fired from the super alignment team. Note that on the West Coast one has to have a super alignment team, you can't just have an alignment team. No doubt soon some firm will have a super duper alignment team. Anyway, he wrote some well over 100-page paper on alignment and such. One of my favourite comments on the YouTube interview of him with a key AI commentator was, quotes, "If Adderall, an amphetamine, could have a conversation with itself, it would be this." One of this chap's concerns was that bad countries like China might use this technology against good countries like the US, and then the US would lose all its freedoms. He didn't seem to have noticed the number of invalid points he made in one sentence there, and how the US is doing a way better job now of destroying itself than any foreign nation ever could or ever will. Now, once again, it may sound like I'm being ungenerous to folk, which isn't nice, but this chap had a job in basically the risk management of LLMs/generative AI, and so was paid to correctly assess risks. Just to wrap up this section on metaphysically maladjusted sci-fi risks, further afield, Australian researcher Dr. Alan Thompson has been YouTubing on LLMs way back since GPT-3, as well as building his own visual-based chatbot. So to put it mildly, he is no slouch, and for sure knows way more than I. However, once again, when out of his domain box, he too makes utterly bizarre remarks. In a recent YouTube entitled The Psychology of Modern LLMs, he stated that, quotes, "An LLM must also have a representation of self and its own place in the world." Crikey. Without the slightest shred of evidence as to must, self, its, and so forth. You see what I mean about reification. An LLM has no place in the world. It's not a thing. It's a certain pattern of bits in the computer memory, just like your spreadsheet. An LLM is nothing mystical. It has no conception of anything. It's just a digital program. And as to having a conception of self, well, it can't conceive and there is no self. This is crass philosophical materialism at work again. Anyway, if you don't agree with my position, I recommend that you check out his world-first declaration on AI consciousness and the Bill of Rights for AI that he released in March 2024. The Google engineer who reported that his system was, quote, sentient should check that out too. Category error doesn't even begin to describe it, where category error might be, for example, mistaking a poem for a lump of cheese. And I'm not cherry-picking weird opinions either. The founder of Anthropic, that home of emigre OpenAIers, whose LLM is right up there with, or arguably above, OpenAI's in terms of performance, stated about LLMs, "I don't know if their experience is positive or negative. Dude, and or nor silicon gates, which are the heart of all chips, have no experience. They're not alive. A computer is literally a flow of electrons." Okay, let's move on from the crazy risks. 4.2, economics. Every new technology changes employment patterns. Every change of technology has led to jobs being lost in one area and created in another. But so far, despite many past technologically apocalyptic predictions, the innovations have always led to a new layer/level of creativity. I've personally been surprised over the past decade of fintech as to how one layer of innovation keeps following another. Keynes in the 1930s forecast that due to increasing mechanisation in the future, we would all only work a 3-day week. What happened? Good question. As far as Keynes' argument, David Graeber probably came the best with his concept of bullshit jobs. There are plenty of crazy rules held in place by the domination of the economy by vast monoliths, be it the state or private, that would be eliminated in a free market, where big co and big state weren't embracing each other and squeezing out the small players. And we can naturally add this whole raft of so-called regulation metastasizing in every sector. Apart from FS, just try watching Clarkson's farm, where he has to register every single animal birth of the state, and the state needs to know what is on his 1,000-acre farm down to the square metre. About 50 years after Keynes' forecast, I recall reading a Scientific American article in the 1980s, forecasting that due to computers, in the future we would all work much less. That might have been nice, but instead IT departments absolutely mushroomed in size, and other employees have gone to new unforeseen roles in the internet and digital worlds. So, in terms of economic impact of AI, we will just have to wait and see. For the moment, there seems to be an increase in microeconomic activity in the latest gold rush, folks trying to find gold in them there hills. Section 4.3, informational. The informational angle is the most prosaic near-term concern. We don't just have the new thing of deepfake audio and deepfake video and such, but the more general challenge of biased information. This, as Musk has highlighted, is one of the most important angles on the use of AI and I'd say computer technologies in general. A Musk meme depicts one path for AI leading to darkness with rogue AI imposing its values upon the world, and the other, sunshine and light, unsurprisingly, his own grok. The meme was good agitprop, but of course in practice, very little is either all bad or all good, and the societal challenge always lies in the middle ground between 0 and 100%. The internet, the World Wide Web, is all about information, but and you may have noticed this, the internet is quite big. As a result of which we're all reliant on, as it were, a librarian pointing us in the relevant direction, or in modern parlance, a search engine, or the latest kid on the block, a librarian that has read most of the books a few times over and has a generally reliable, low-resolution knowledge of everything in those books. So before we Google stuff, and now for many topics, it's just quicker to ask ChatGPT. Both of these suffer from biases. I've noticed how corporatized Google has become over the years. Now you almost never get anything in the search results other than corporates. I recall watching a short YouTube on this phenomenon, which pointed out the great value of adding the word Reddit to a Google search, which I've now done many times, and it is super empowering, as for many categories of query, one wants to get to a human conversation rated by humans rather than corporate websites. As to LLMs, so far the more input data and the larger the model, the more accurate the outputs have been. Those who have to date have bet on scaling and kept winning expect to keep winning, whilst a small minority point to the need for different AI technologies at some point. Either way, the models will keep improving for some time, and one subtle risk is that we get so used to, say, using ChatGPT as it's way better than Googling and getting a bunch of crap SEO to death web pages, but that we start to assimilate erroneous outputs as being the truth. A different type of informational risk, in the case of LLMs acting as librarian, is a challenge that they might come up with new information by joining the dots, as it were, between things they've read. Indeed, it is almost certain that they will, and that they can be used as great tools to discover new things. Great, but not always perhaps. A cartoon version of this potential downside would be, for example, ChatGPT giving me a way to make an atom bomb using items found only in the average domestic kitchen. That wouldn't be good. Less cartoonish was when this penny dropped for me of an example where mere academic, shall we say, so no politicisation angles at all, information provision could be catastrophic. In late 2023, I followed the insane OpenAI boardroom kerfuffle. At the time, one tweet I saw said that allegedly ChatGPT had shown that P equals NP. This took me back to my computer science lectures, and after some head scratching, I recalled being lectured that P is not equal to NP, or in simpler terms, that some problems will take a linear amount of time to compute with complexity. So, for example, counting 100 things takes roughly 100 times longer than counting one thing. Others, simplistically again, take an exponential time. And then the penny dropped. Oh shit. If true, all encryption algorithms, which rely on the fact that brute force cannot break them, would be crackable, followed immediately by, shit, so someone can nickel my money from my banking apps. As it turns out, allegedly, who knows what the deep state knows, P still doesn't equal NP. But this is a prime example of where simple provision of apparently innocuous information can have massive consequences. Final section of 4.4, technological. Technological is a fun angle, as tech is always changing and evolving. As I noted in the prior episode, one reason OpenAI leapt ahead is that they released their product to the public and thus got a huge new data set of real-life interactions to help tune their models. Developers also came up with plenty of ideas and angles on how to leverage this technology that no one had previously thought of. We should also note that computing technologies, not within the realm of AI, are also super important sources of potential risk. Back to P not equal to NP and app security, quantum computing, if it ever gets scaled, might introduce all sorts of new challenges. Technology is a huge field, but for now let's just look at four angles: cybersecurity, so-called alignment, autonomy, and physical technology. Cybersecurity. All technology is a tool. All tools can be misused. Generally, LLMs qua tools will empower people to do more of what they're doing already and better. So let's start with the obvious challenge of the use of the tools by bad actors, leading to cybersecurity and privacy issues. Scammers will get better with LLMs to power them. Your computer's antiviral software will need to be expanded to defend against agentic LLM hacks, more on that below, into your data and your machine. The status of this is ongoing, but that's already the nature of the cybersecurity industry anyway. Alignment. Alignment is the huge issue in the field. Another word is safety. Another trust. Trojan horses all. Back to Musk's concern about embedding socio-political views within AI. And they're there to an extent already, as it's trained on not exactly neutral source material. As an example of woke LLMs, Google's Gemini notoriously replied that misgendering Caitlyn Jenner and nuclear war were on a par. How the hell did they train that model, I wonder? Or mistrain, obviously. Now that was a farce and obvious, but OpenAI products are more subtly imbued with such, and as Musk correctly says, the woke mind virus is destroying civilization. But hey, it's doing that well enough already without LLMs. As with all information, even beyond the digital space, there is an ongoing info war between those who want Ofcom, the BBC, the CIA, the EU and so forth to, quotes, keep them safe, unquotes, and those of us who'd rather that those entities all fucked off and left us alone. This info war in tech is between the self-regarding Bezos and Zuckerberg class, who have strong political leanings, which they foist upon the rest of us, and on the other hand, Musk et al., I'm not sure there's many et al.s, who follow a more US constitutional line about free speech. The info wars are the real battle within the West in terms of this great reset versus great awakening. And in my opinion, we will only get a resolution of them with some version of a Nuremberg trial where all the "we were just keeping you safe" brigade are tried and found guilty of killing millions with their dangerous and ineffective mRNA injections, which were known to be that at the time. There's way more than enough information in the public domain already that there can be no doubt, which is one reason a handful of US states are suing Pfizer, and RFK Jr. wrote his excoriating book about the evil fantasy, a Schreibtischtäter, if there ever was one, Hannah Arendt's term for a desk murderer pronounced by someone who doesn't pronounce German well. So this alignment question needs to be considered within a far wider societal context. Alignment teams are there, in principle, to keep us safe, but safe according to their definitions and biases. The penny dropped here watching a YouTuber talk about why jailbreaking LLMs and using the raw systems was so important. The propaganda is that only criminals would want to do that. However, vice versa, do you want your ChatGPT answer to be filtered through, well, let's be crude, West Coast Democrats' positions who've ruined their state? Or would you rather have the unfiltered version and decide yourself whether to leave your spouse rather than believing a crummy chatbot? More formally, within AI, Andrej Karpathy has nailed it most succinctly and skewered this whole field with his comment that even humans aren't aligned. So what are OpenAI, Anthropic, who want to be even, quotes, safer, Google, Meta et al. Aligning with? Whilst we can almost all agree that we want AI to output human useful content and not human dangerous content, if we move beyond a 5-year-old's binary understanding of the world, there lies infinite scope for reasonable men to differ about what to align with. This applies on steroids in a world where many are ideologically possessed. Many of the concerns of key figures around misinformation, for example, do make me laugh, when in recent years the main source of such has been the state, not the citizen. Autonomy. So this is an interesting one. If all AI visions do is fine you for speeding on a motorway or identify you in pictures on Facebook, so be it. If LLMs simply give you text output based on your input, so be it. One of the hottest topics of VC AI investment right now is AI agents. Just think smarter bots. Let's get this over viscerally. If, for example, you're naive and stupid or just keen on working off a little excess wealth, you could, for example, have a program query ChatGPT, asking it to work out a winning stock market trading algorithm, connect it to your bank account and come back a few hours later and see if you're rich or bankrupt. Embedding an LLM, a simple input-output program, in a system which does stuff, for example, creates or changes documents or does API calls or accesses bank accounts, etc., definitely changes the risks from you being offended by the program outputting so-called offensive text to the program fucking up something big time. It's extremely early days for this field, which goes way beyond LLM's wrong risk answer, and we shall have to see. Finally, in this section, physical risks. To level it up, we need to address physical consequences. At a purely software level, using agents as above, if ChatGPT starts a nuclear war, it will not be ChatGPT's fault, but the pillar who provided an API to launch nuclear weapons. Once again, this is cartoon-like, but it gets the key point over, namely that it is the provision of services that connect to the physical world that presents the physical risk to humanity. Reid Hoffman related an argument he'd had with Elon Musk, who was tweeting as far back as 2019, before LLMs were known by more than a few handfuls of folks, about a so-called robocalypse. But to create a robocalypse, you'd have to provide a zillion APIs, which would enable an agentic program to build and test a robot, which is sci-fi for the foreseeable future. Hoffman's argument was that the chance of this was de minimis compared to everything else. Well, that is a guess, unless Musk's nightmares are about self-driving Teslas and they contain a bug and start crashing into people in certain circumstances. To me, this are they physically dangerous question which is one of the most important that folks fantasize about, is about machines and automation in general. Factories have been automated for quite some time and machines have killed countless people. Airplanes and their autopilots have improved over time only after killing many people, led to upgrades in hardware and software. In passing, I've never heard anyone speculate that, quotes, increasing the intelligence of autopilots will mean that at some point the autopilots decide to kill off the pilots, as that will be the safer for the passengers. I wonder whether this is as the people working on such control systems are literally connected to physical reality, as they see their program's physical consequences on a daily basis and have to do a ton of testing. Vice versa, if your programs never touch the real world, you are literally unconnected to reality. Your programs, after all, are just processing ones and zeros and have no connection to the physical world, just via APIs to other programs processing ones and zeros. Physical danger is a key and major risk, but we need to get outside the AI silos and consider the so-called defense industries, which have been working for a long time on automated killing machines, up to and including a successful test of a dogfight autopilot program in a modified F-16 which can fly itself and beat all the human pilots. More simply, drones loom large. So is physical danger a risk? Absolutely. But it's a risk already and nothing to do with the inward-looking world of AI. Once again, the main source of danger and death comes from the state, and certain states' love of perma-wars makes loads of money, don't you know? As Assange warned us before his years of torture, incarcerated in the UK for 23 hours a day in a 2x3 metre cell, the aim isn't to win wars, but to have forever wars as a mechanism for circulating taxpayers' money back up to a transnational elite. So can machines be dangerous? Absolutely. But I don't see this as related to AI as such, but rather as to the war machine's desire to create ever better killing machines. We don't need to wait years for ChatGPT's grandchildren to decide to wipe out humanity and start building things. The evil is manifest already. Section 5. Who controls the technology? In our daily lives, we are continuously controlling risks. In business or FS, we control risks. Always hopefully mindful of the maxim from Days of Thunder, control is an illusion. The key question is who will control the risks? On the one hand, can you trust private companies who in this neoliberal world, no matter what their PR lines, are pretty monofocused at sociopathically increasing their power and profit? And the only thing worse than private companies is the state, simply as it condenses more power into its hands and therefore is more dangerous. There's an additional problem here that regulators have proved to be atrocious, on the one hand being captured by corporates, on the other being generally incompetent and inventing tons of rules which do not do the trick and just gum up the economy. As Musk has said, the ratio of referees to players on the pitch has got way too high, which is one major reason for the decline of the West. The US has a very efficient and transparent system for purchasing politicians' votes, although as it has been suggested, it would be clearer if they all had to wear the logos of which organisations had bought them on their shirts. Ditto for regulatory capture. In return for favours, regulators will create for you a huge moat to keep new challengers at bay and overlook your transgressions. Indeed, in the case of Big Pharma, the FDA will act not just as your regulator, but as your cheerleaders and produce outrageous lies such as safe and effective and get the regime propagandists to broadcast that message on your behalf. And as for the evidence that a supranational organisation should regulate, well, that hardly has empirical evidence to back it up. So, for the time being, my feeling is that this is going to be one that is slow to evolve. All options look bad. And the even bigger picture is that Western civilization, the US, and puppet EU empire of lies, is not only destroying itself and other countries, but is collapsing. So let's summarise. In section 1 we discussed the fact that LLMs can be built with amazingly small programs that, using well-understood algorithms and a matrix of functions, think spreadsheet, just a more complex layout, can, given a ton of compute, a ton of data, and some smart computer programmers, amazingly enough, condense huge chunks of the internet into a roughly 100-fold smaller file of weights for that function matrix. The long and short of which is it can next word predict so well that you can import a query and extremely often get a great answer. Something that most of the AI community did not see coming a few years ago. In section 2 we highlighted that new technologies throughout history have always had upsides, but also downsides that can take a hell of a long time for society to iron out. New technologies have generally moved power geographically further away from the people, led to great wealth concentration in the hands of a few, and more subtly, technology conditions man to becoming himself ever more procedural, ever more robotic. In section 3, we looked at the challenges of assessing the risk that AI poses. Experts are always experts within boxes, and in this case, all the major risks are outside the box. We examined several dimensions of how humans routinely misestimate risks: perceptual biases, the power of words to hypnotize and lead one down certain paths of thinking, philosophical and metaphysical holes in the scariest arguments, the huge gaping hole of there being no definition of the I in AI, the intelligence bit, and huge assumptions about what, quotes, more, unquote, so this undefined attribute will lead to. We looked at the games people play in the tech business world, and their forked tongues aim at maximising marketing, fundraising, and the desire to join the big boys club and become big AI, owning politicians, regulators, being best buddies of the deep state, and thus joining the US WEF gravy train for life. Finally, we looked at psychological biases. Where you stand very much depends on where you sit. In section 4, we looked at the 4 areas of potential risky impact of AI in general. The sci-fi risks are well over-discussed at the expense of way more likely prosaic risks, and most can be dismissed out of hand. Arguments, when examined, are extremely weak and dismissed not just by myself but CTOs of other leading generative AI firms. All new tech changes the economy by definition. However, historically, predictions of a life of ease have not yet been met. We shall see this time. The huge challenges in the information domain, the context being the info wars, the war for who controls the narratives on which society is run. Crudely, the state and its propagandists point to their despised citizens as a source of information. Meanwhile, many, but certainly not all, the Great Awakening has only gone so far, point to the state, its controlling oligarchs and megacodes, and the deep state as the source of the liars. And then finally, in section 4, we looked at the risks in technology. Cybersecurity will be affected as it is by every computational development. Scammers will be empowered. Alignment is the big issue within AI. Crudely, how do firms ensure their tech does good, not harm? But who will define it? As Karpathy aptly points out, humans aren't even aligned with themselves. So what are tech firms aligning their AI with? So far, West Coast woke biases, more or less subtly perhaps. We discussed the emerging world of AI agents, smarter bots, and so-called autonomy. A hot investment sphere, but buyer beware. This led into our final technological angle, that of causing physical harm. This is a given, with leading countries' big war industries already having created killing machines without needing ChatGPT and its friends. And as we just discussed in section 5, there is a very open question about how will this technology be controlled. Who will say what it should be aligned with? Will open source LLMs of power emerge and invade the would-be censors and render this moot? A very bleeding edge issue for society. So, that having been said, what is my simple takeaway? Well, LLMs are super cool, and hopefully we will get better use cases than seemingly every firm's web page containing a crap chatbot. It is one thing inventing awesome new technology, but as we've seen in some areas of fintech, quite another finding real use cases. So far for me, LLMs are just a generally superior Google alternative, giving better results and removing browsing time, but not always. Plenty of folk are having fun with the image and video creation abilities, but we will have to wait to see what emerges beyond this, wow, this is amazing. As to risks, I discount the sci-fi completely and am way more concerned with the acceleration in death machine technology where the real money is being spent. This having been said, in recent wars it has been the cheap drones in numbers, along with some smart engineering, for example hypersonics, that have been winning. The US empire's technology has been comprehensively beaten, and the disastrous Ukraine war is being won on old-fashioned basics like being able to scale one's ammunition production way faster. Most of all, in conclusion, I'm once again with Karpathy, who said that his biggest concern about risk is nuclear war. Hearing Dr. Strangeloves in several countries saying it is an option that needs to be put on the table is way more scary than the idea that one morning I wake up and ChatGPT's grandchildren have overnight created a killing machine using materials found in my study. So, outro time. Wow, phew. What on earth was I thinking doing 3 specials in a row? I must have been mad. I've literally had to write a whole book's worth of material, which is insane. Never again. No more specials. I hope that this mini-series has, however, been of service. A special thank you to those listeners who kindly fed back that they found them enlightening. I'm looking forward in the next and final episode in the mini-series to being joined by a guest once more to discuss the future of FS, fintech, and the plans to level up the LFP. Here in LFP Towers, we too have big plans afoot, and are selling a house and heading off into the wide blue yonder to do a combination of digital nomading and a somewhat delayed gap year. I'd be very happy to find a new sane country to emigrate to. I'm more than done with this. As to why, well, there are three main factors in my mind. The first, for a long time, is the weather. We joke about it, but only as it is actually genuinely crap. The second is the NHS. It is catastrophic and has damaged my parents greatly. The recounting of this would last forever, but for those abroad with no experience, some simple vignettes recently are that my father, 89, fell earlier this year, and he broke his hip/femur and had to wait 16 hours for an ambulance in pain, during which he could have bled to death, as the doctor later confirmed when I put this to him. My mother was in hospital for weeks and was meant to be given 30 minutes physio a day, but instead got about 5 minutes a week, and by the time she left hospital, she could never walk again. A musician friend slipped and banged her head and lost the feeling in her hands and arms, and spent about 18 hours in A&E before being examined. And once again, you don't need to be a doctor to know that she could have experienced irretrievable brain damage in that wait. And these are just tips of the icebergs. And the third category is that the country has completely collapsed. I think for me the final straw was receiving another increasingly threatening letter from my electricity company saying I hadn't yet replied about upgrading my meter to a smart meter. You know, those that enable a company/state to turn your power off when they want, or if you've mistweeted, no doubt. And if, they continued, I did not reply, they would have no alternative to put me on a super expensive tariff. No alternative, eh? No alternative? We didn't stand alone against Germany for 2 years and fight a bloody world war to end up with this bollocks. I will spare you the 1001 examples, but one reminder I see all too often, that this is not the country it has been for centuries, are the all too frequent signs saying, quotes, our staff will not tolerate abuse. What? In England, where people are notoriously, or were, notoriously polite? Well, that and things like a stat I saw recently saying that rapes and murders were up 6 to 8-fold in Bournemouth, which for most of my life was genuinely a super genteel place to retire to. And that's not to mention the loss of social cohesion. In the war, my father was evacuated, as were around 1 million children. That is, kids were sent literally to live with strangers, something that could only be done in a high-trust, cohesive society. A chap I worked with went to prep school in Scotland, and at the age of about 7, took his first long train ride and arrived at some small Scottish station, where, due to some complete cock-up, there was no one waiting to collect him. So the station master put him up at his house for 2 nights while it was all sorted out. In the neoliberalised, neoconned, woke, Sorosian, open borders, globalist, hellhole world, such anecdotes might as well be from 1,000 years ago. Interestingly, I say interestingly with quotes around it, when one attempts to emigrate, one finds that open borders are one-way valves. It's actually super hard to escape the HMRC, for example. You can literally be away for 5 years, and then if you come back, they will say, oh, you never really left, and they will retrospectively tax you on all those 5 years. Another angle, the UK government, I recently discovered, to my horror, freezes your state pension if you leave, not the UK, but if you leave Europe for some reason. And that would be the pension plan they forcibly made you pay into in the first place all of your life. They're going to steal the returns. So, on the one hand, it's hard to leave the status of being a cash cow for a corrupt state's perma-wars and perma-crises and WEF-driven introduction of neo-feudalism. On the other hand, next to nowhere outside the US empire has open borders and will provide a path to citizenship for legal incomers. It's quite a challenge. Anyway, enough of all that. We prefer to focus on the future, a future of exploring the world, along with doing this digital nomading which tech, for all its challenges, has enabled. So, if any of you out there need help in governance, business, fintech, FS or AI, that sounds fun, give me a shout. I do have, after all, a limited capacity for sitting on beaches. Live long and prosper. Thanks for listening. If you're in need of a non-executive or advisory director with deep expertise, experience and contacts in the worlds of both traditional FS and fintech, or unique insight into how to make your board an engine of growth today, contact me at mike@mikeballiman.com. If you just need one-off advice in these areas, via clarity.fm/mikeballiman.
We could sit in a bender all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moon ride, watching a happy moon ride. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fade in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight